In 1921, the Malabar district of British India, modern-day Kerala, witnessed an armed uprising unparalleled in its history. Fueled by the Khilafat movement, in support of the Turkish Caliphate, and the non-cooperation movement, it evolved into a violent rebellion against the British administration and the Hindu population. This is the story of those 6 months of chaos based on contemporary records. April 28, 1920, the Malabar District Conference at Manjeri. The air is thick with the heat of summer and political dissent.
We must adopt the policy of non-cooperation. The British have betrayed the Caliph in Turkey.
Annie Besant opposed.
I warn you, mixing the Khilafat religious issue with politics will lead to consequences you cannot control.
She was defeated. The Caliphate resolution passed with an overwhelming majority of mapilas from Aranad.
Bolo Takbir! Allahu Akbar!
August 18, 1920. Gandhi and Shaukat Ali visits Calicut.
The Khilafat movement is a struggle for justice that every Indian must support.
Ali Musliar, a teacher of the Quran at Kija K. Pali Mosque for 14 years, becomes a local Khilafat secretary.
The words of Gandhiji and Shaukat Ali are clear. We establish Khilafat rule. The Amir of Afghanistan is coming to overthrow this government. Allahu Akbar!
The seed was sown. In the interior taluks of Aranad and Waluvanad, the message of Swaraj, self-rule, was interpreted not as peaceful protest, but as a call to war.
It is a command from the Almighty. To support the Khilafat is to protect our faith. We swear, no fear of the kafir, no fear of death.
The Khilafat movement in Malabar takes a militant turn as volunteers swear oaths of absolute loyalty. Reports of Khilafat meetings and the manufacturing of knives by Hindu blacksmiths in Pookottur under threat by the Moplas are pouring in. The district magistrate, E.F. Thomas, and police superintendent, R.H. Hitchcock, are concerned.
Pookottur is already beyond my control. They have started making war knives. The mapilas are intimidating Hindu blacksmiths in Pookottur to make them.
Mapilas themselves are said to hold is that if 1,000 of them armed with these knives could surround 100 soldiers, enough of them would get through any rifle fire to get home with the knife and wipe the soldiers out. Perhaps the gravest symptom of the fanatical spirit is the presence of women to cheer on their menfolk. This is something new in the religious history of Malabar. Some of the mapilas at Tirurangadi some months ago began to give Mohammedan names to the Nayar women of their neighborhood. The matter was thought of as a joke, but now I understand it was not. It is a situation which clearly cannot be allowed to continue. Something must be done to dispel the idea that Mapila commands the position. The more ignorant Mapila probably believes that the British Raj is finished and the Mapila Raj has taken its place. We need to raid Tirurangadi for weapons.
August 20th, 1921. The district magistrate, E.F. Thomas, and police superintendent, R.H. Hitchcock, arrive at Tirurangadi to arrest leaders and seize war knives. The search is conducted lawfully. Mopla officers remove their boots before entering the Kijikepali Mosque.
The Mambra Mosque is destroyed! They have fired on the Mambra Mosque! Defend the faith!
A lie spreads faster than fire. The Mambram Mosque was on the other side of the river and was never touched, but the rumor ignited the rebellion. There are reasons to believe it was Ali Musliar himself that spread the rumor. By noon, a massive mob of 3,000 Moplas, armed with knives, swords, and sticks, converged on the British force from all sides. The mob surges forward. British officers Lieutenant Johnstone and Mr. Rowley hold their ground, attempting to parley. Brutal violence follows as the officers are swarmed. Rowley and Johnstone were separated from their party. They were hacked to death. Their mutilated bodies were later found in a ditch. Meanwhile, another mob from Tanur and Parapanangani arrived by train and was approaching Tirurangadi. Their leader, Kunhi Kadar, marches toward the British line. They carry war knives and bludgeons. Kadar holds a red flag high above his head. They have come to avenge the supposed insult to their religion. When bayonet charges failed to repel the rebels, the soldiers resorted to gunfire, killing 9 rebels. Rations and vital supplies for the troops were halted at the railway station and never arrived. Despite having beaten back the rebels, the British force was forced to abandon Tirurangadi and retreat to Calicut. That night, the distant Nilambur Kovilakam was attacked by a gang that had traveled all the way from Pookottur. 17 people were hacked to death. Local Congress leader MP Narayana Menon, known locally as Mapila Menon, delivered inflammatory speeches encouraging violence.
Those against Congress and Khilafah ought to be killed. If you die, you'll go to heaven. Reserve ammunition for attacking the soldiers. Swords and sticks will be sufficient to attack our countrymen who are against Khilafat.
The rebellion now spread like wildfire. Government offices burned, the Manjeri treasury was looted, telegraph lines were cut, roads and bridges were destroyed. Railway tracks were ripped up for miles, sealing South Malabar off from the outside world. With the British in temporary retreat, the rebel leaders proclaimed Swaraj, independence. At the Tirurangadi Mosque, Ali Musliar was installed as Ali Raja.
This is now Khilafat country.
From there, he issued edicts and proclaimed the end of British rule. Ferry and toll revenues, he declared, would now belong to the Khilafat government. Varian Kunath Kunya Hamid Haji claimed even greater authority.
I'm Raja of the Hindus, Amir of the Muhammadan, and Colonel of the Khilafat army.
For a brief, volatile moment, South Malabar was ruled by a parallel government. And then, the atrocities began. The Hindu population was targeted. By the second or third day, reports began to emerge of looting and of forced conversions. August 26, 1921. The British garrison at Malappuram was cut off, isolated. A relief column set out to reach them. On the road near Pookottur, it was ambushed. Nearly 4,000 moplas lay in wait, concealed in the paddy fields. Suddenly, they surged forward, charging the British line, heedless of rifle fire. It was a frontal assault and a suicidal one. The battle raged for 5 relentless hours. Again and again, the rebels advanced, displaying reckless bravery as they ran straight into machine gun fire. By the end, nearly 400 rebels lay dead. The British victory at Pookottur proved decisive. It saved the Hindus of Ernad from what contemporaries feared would be wholesale forced conversions. Reports spoke of preparations already underway, of mopla clothing being collected for the conversions planned that Friday. This was one of only 2 occasions on which the Mapilas directly confronted a British force. They genuinely believed the British Raj had ended and that a Khilafat Raj had begun. The second encounter came months later in November, when the rebellion was already collapsing and Mapilas were surrendering in large numbers. By then, the show of strength had become unavoidable. It is also worth noting that Varian Twinnath Kunja Hamid Haji, later celebrated as a hero, was conspicuous by his absence on both occasions. He was present in the locality, but fled rather than fight. Ali Musalyar was captured on August 30. He was tried before a special tribunal and, in due course, executed. Defeated in open battle, the rebels turned against the Hindu population. Contrary to later sanitized narratives, the rebels were not engaged in sustained combat with British forces. Instead, they were looting Hindu settlements, while the British acted largely as a third party, attempting to protect civilians. Whenever the army advanced, the rebels melted away. This persistent refusal to engage the British directly was one of the key reasons the rebellion dragged on for nearly 6 months before it was finally crushed. September 25, 1921, the Tuvorwell Massacre. The rebels rounded up a group of Hindus and marched them to a hillock. Their crime? Selling eggs and milk to the military. Chembraseri Tangle led the group.
Convert to the merciful religion, or else. die!
Those who refused were brutally murdered and their bodies thrown into a well. That night, 38 Hindus lost their lives. One case recorded in court proceedings is especially gruesome. Kumara Panikar, a head constable, was killed in an exceptionally brutal manner, his skull cut with a saw. His body was then thrown into the well. Court records cite eyewitness testimony describing a chilling scene, a grim competition among the assailants over who would have the pleasure of killing those helpless victims. Thousands were forcibly converted to Islam. To refuse meant death. One victim, Kelapan, endured an especially brutal ordeal and deserves special mention. He refused to convert and his neck was slashed and thrown into a well and left for dead. By chance, by sheer miracle, he lived to tell the tale. By this time, the principal culprits were being captured. The remaining rebels were surrendering in large numbers. It was now clear the dream of a Caliphate Raj had failed. Defection from the cause had to be stopped. Loyalty to the government was punished with medieval brutality. Khan Bahadur Chekuti, himself a mapila, was beheaded. His severed head was mounted on a spear and paraded around as a warning to the loyalists. The act was carried out by a gang under Varayankunath Kunya Hamid Haji. Yet in later sanitized histories, he is recast as a hero, with claims that the British, supposedly awed by his prowess, offered to let him walk free if he surrendered. The record says otherwise. Haji was implicated in at least 20 murders, with ample evidence for conviction. No authority was ever going to release him. He was not a hero, he was a criminal. As the dream of a Caliphate Raj began to crumble, the rebels increasingly turned to large-scale atrocities and reprisals against the Hindu population. Temples were burned and desecrated. The choice was stark: conversion or death. Hindu families fled by the thousands. Refugees were hunted down and attacked mercilessly. A steady stream of the displaced poured into Calicut, where relief camps were established by the Arya Samaj in the Servants of India Society. Malabar lay in ruins, temples destroyed, houses burned, and thousands dead. Though the dream of a Caliphate Raj had collapsed, the rebels continued to avoid direct engagement with the military. Instead, they relied on hit-and-run attacks against the Hindu population. By now, the rebels had withdrawn into the jungles. The arrival of Gurkha regiments marked a turning point. Trained for jungle warfare, they pursued the rebels deep into the forests of the Western Ghats. November 19, 1921, Tirur railway station. The jails were overcrowded. 100 convicted prisoners, not innocent civilians rounded up at random, as later sanitized accounts would claim, were being sent to the Coimbatore jail. 97 mapilas and 3 Hindus were packed into a windowless, unventilated luggage van, wagon number 1711. The train moved through the night. Inside the wagon, a living hell unfolded, crushing heat and suffocation. When the doors were opened at Pookottur, 64 men were dead. 6 more would die later. The incident came to be known as the wagon tragedy, a black stain on the suppression of the rebellion. A later inquiry revealed that the wagon had been freshly painted and that the wire mesh over the ventilation openings was clogged, fatally restricting airflow. At last, the rebels met their match, the Gurkha regiments. Trained for jungle warfare, they hunted themselves. As food supplies ran out, the rebellion collapsed from within. Followers deserted their leaders. surrenders came in the thousands. One by one, the leadership was neutralized, captured, or shot dead. Muhammad Haji, the self-proclaimed ruler of the Hindus, Amir of the Mohammedans, and colonel of the Khilafat army, was taken into custody. With starvation setting in and its leaders gone, the dream of a parallel kingdom ended, not in triumph, but in defeat. Ali Musaliar was executed at Coimbatore jail. Lavakuti, his close associate and lieutenant, took his own life.
Forgive me.
Varian Kunath
I'm a
Kun
loyal
Muhammad
servant of the
Haji
king.
was executed by firing squad on January 20th, 1922. Chembraseri Tangal was shot following trial. MP Narayan Menon was tried and sentenced to 14 years imprisonment. Nearly all those responsible for the crimes were eventually traced, apprehended, and punished. Early on, the government decided not to provide compensation for the losses suffered by the Hindu community. Instead, generous loans were offered to help families begin again. Almost everyone who had been forced to convert returned to their original faith. But it soon became clear, as long as those responsible for forced conversions remained in the region, peace was impossible. There were even renewed attacks on those who had returned. As a result, the Moplas involved in forced conversions were encouraged to leave the area. Some were resettled with their families in the Andaman Islands, where they earned a living through labor. Others moved permanently to parts of Karnataka, including the Kannara region. Those given prison sentences of up to 2 years were granted suspension on payment of prescribed fines. But there was more. These fines had to be paid in person before the very officials they had once defied, standing humbly before authority. This combination of punishment, public submission, and a return to ordinary life proved decisive. Justice was delivered as far as possible, and seemed to be delivered. The victims were convinced that justice had been done, and the Mopla community was convinced that punishment and not revenge had followed. For these reasons, the rebellion did not return.
So what exactly happened in 1921? 3 explanations are usually offered: that it was a freedom struggle, an agrarian revolt, or a communal uprising. Let us test these claims against the facts. If this were an agrarian revolt, landlords, Hindu and Muslim alike, would have been targeted. They were not. Not a single Muslim landlord was attacked on the grounds of landlordism. Many of those targeted were not even landlords at all. They were ordinary peasants. The only pan factor was that they were Hindus. Throughout the rebellion, there were no slogans against landlords. Nor did a single arrested rebel tell a court that landlord oppression or agrarian discontent had driven him to violence. If this were a revolt against British rule, the British would have been the primary targets. They were not. Fewer than 5 British officers and only about 40 soldiers were killed during the entire rebellion. On the very first day, August 20th, 1921, the rebels were not attacking the British. Instead, they traveled to distant Nilambur Kovilakam to attack and kill 17 people there. The rebels directly engaged the army only twice. The first engagement occurred in the early days, when the rebels misread the situation and believed British rule had ended. The second took place in November, when the rebellion was already crumbling, and a display of strength was needed to prevent desertions. It must be noted that, on both occasions, although the attacks were planned, under the leadership of Variam Kunath Kun Muhammad Haji, he withdrew at the last moment and went into hiding. He was no hero. The consistent strategy was simple: avoid the army. When troops arrived, the rebels dispersed. When troops withdrew, they looted. This pattern was later sanitized and described as guerrilla warfare. No rebel leader, including Ali Musliar, ever told a court that the objective was to expel the British and establish Swaraj. What they stated instead was that they had taken up arms to establish Islamic rule. Loot was treated as an added bonus. There were no slogans for Swaraj, no slogans against landlords, not even against the British. Only religious slogans. When a mob under Kunji Khadar attacked the police at Tirurangadi, they carried a red banner bearing a crescent and star and Allahu Akbar written in Arabic. Months before the uprising, reports noted mapilas giving Muslim names to their Nair women neighbors. From the third day of the rebellion onward, attacks on Hindus and forced conversions were widely reported. Around 320 temples were desecrated or destroyed. Forced conversions became so extensive that British authority even debated whether a fatwa declaring them un-Islamic could be obtained. With few exceptions, participation was confined to Muslims. Almost all the gangs had a Tangal or Musliar attached to the group. A small number of Hindu Congress supporters initially joined, only to flee later for their lives. Contrary to popular belief, the Khilafat cause itself appears to have been secondary, because in court, Ali Musliar and others explicitly disowned it. Variam Kunnat Kunahamad Haji stated that Khilafat was Turkey's concern and had nothing to do with them. Some other leaders scarcely understood what Khilafat even meant. What emerges instead is a fringe group under Ali Musliar seeking to establish Islamic rule, adopting the name Khilafat, which had even received Gandhi's approval to lend moral legitimacy. In effect, they simply took up a respectable label, Khilafat.